Good day and good morning. The Guam Legislature is back in session. We are still in second reading. We are now on number 6 on the list of bills, and that's Senator Dennis Rodriguez's bill 16-34. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Hafaday, good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 16-34 as amended by the Committee on Health, Tourism, Military Affairs, and Senior Citizens on the third reading. I'll be able to briefly discuss it.
There being no objections.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Bill 16 is part of an overall effort by the Committee on Health to expand the services for treatment and therapy of our families on Guam who have autism. Last term, we moved to start a process where we're moving to establish Guam's first autism center. We're working very closely with stakeholders in the community, different organizations. To name a few, Hunter Speaks organization, the Autism Together. I knew if I started mentioning, I'll forget the exact names, but a whole group of individuals that really are working to expand the services of autism. Last week, Friday, the Guam Medical Society held a symposium over at the Guam Museum, and we were there, and it's really nice to see a lot of different organizations, stakeholders starting to come out and see the importance of us being able to bring services on island for families really that don't have the means to take their children off island to seek specialized care. We know that with the service providers we have on island today, that they're doing the best they could with what they could in being able to service our families. And so what this bill does, Mr. Speaker, is set one of those groundworks in ensuring that private health insurance starts to cover autism spectrum disorders. And I know that as we were discussing a previous bill yesterday on ensuring that cancer screening, certain cancer screenings are also covered in insurance, that we have some resistance from our partners in the industry. However, these are one of those things, Mr. Speaker, that we as policymakers must ensure that our people have access to, and that if they do have private health insurance, that this type of disorder is also covered. I know that we're working to ensure that our GovGuam insurance also takes the lead in being able to cover, and also the public programs that we have also provide coverage from ASD. And so I'm asking my colleagues to please support this measure and start in that process that we have already laid in the last term in ensuring that we expand services for our autistic families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Rodriguez. Any other member of the legislature wish to be heard? Senator Nicholas. After Senator Nicholas, anybody else? Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the author for putting in the work to be able to craft this piece of legislation. It is a very serious attempt to be able to provide coverage for individuals who are on the autism spectrum, and having a family member who is on the autism spectrum, this is near and dear to my heart. In going through the measure, there's a number of items, Mr. Speaker, that I think need to be tweaked just a little bit in order to be able to accomplish the goal of the legislation. First and foremost, this bill is intending to allow for autism spectrum disorder and the treatment so associated to be covered by health insurance within the territory of Guam. There is a section here in the bill that speaks outside of health insurance in particular, and that section begins on page, it begins on page 8, line 8. And if I could have my colleagues reference that section, from page 8, line 8, all the way to page 9, line 15, the bill speaks about a task force an autism spectrum disorder task force. And when I was initially evaluating the bill, I found that the duties assigned to this task force and the findings that this task force may render are potentially different from what the actual insurance mandates are in the remaining provisions throughout the bill. And so in consultation with the author, I advised that perhaps we can create this task force as a separate piece of legislation, only to ensure that there wouldn't be any kind of conflict in terms of what this task force does, what it finds, and how those findings may or may not jive with what the insurance mandates are in the other provisions throughout this bill. And so, in consultation with the author, absent any objections, I would like to propose an amendment to strike, starting on page 8, line 8, all the way to page 9, line 15.
Thank you very much. On that amendment, any senator wish to be heard on the St. Nicholas amendment? Is there an objection to the St. Nicholas amendment? There being none, so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, just kind of, I'm going to try and keep this as coherent as possible, because there are just a number of areas that I want to touch. The first area that I want to touch is relative to some discussion that we had earlier, Mr. Speaker, about fraternal benefit societies and what we were mandating in other measures earlier today that ultimately resulted in us including amendments to exclude fraternal benefit societies. If we go to page starting on page 6, line 19, at the end of line 19, there is a mention of fraternal benefit societies. On page 7, line 5, at the beginning of line 5, there is also another mention of fraternal benefit societies. There may be other areas. Before I make a blanket amendment requesting that legal counsel perhaps exclude fraternal benefit societies, I would at this time be willing to yield either to the author or to any other member if they wanted to provide any kind of clarification as to why we would be including fraternal benefit societies in this mandate, but excluding it, for example, in other mandates.
Rodriguez, do you yield?
As indicated by the author, I believe we're okay to make the amendment,
Okay.
Mr. Speaker. So with that, I'd like to make an amendment to have legal counsel, as necessary throughout the measure, exclude fraternal benefit societies.
Any objection or any senator wish to be heard on the amendment? No senator wishing to be heard, and seeing or hearing no objection.
Thank you, Mr.
You have
Speaker.
the floor.
I guess I'll just take it from the beginning now. Starting on page 3, line 20. Line 20, subsection A is referencing section 3, and it lists criteria for treatment to be provided. And on the first line of line 20, line A, it says the treatment is prescribed by a physician and surgeon duly licensed to practice on Guam. I believe we should perhaps strike and replace it with or.
Probably correct. The author, fine. All right, there being no objection, and is struck and or is set in its place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 4, subsection B, it goes into specifying who may provide services or administer the services, and items 1 and 2, the qualified ASD provider and the qualified ASD service professional, those are both further defined on page 5, subsections A and B on lines 14 and 20. However, item 3 on page 4, line 8, does not define a qualified paraprofessional. And so in reading that item 3, and in consultation with the author, I believe the intent is to just allow for a paraprofessional to be able to administer while being supervised and employed by a qualified provider. And that is not outside the norm, Mr. Speaker. It's like hiring an assistant to be able to administer a particular therapy, a particular test. And so long as they're being supervised and employed by someone who is qualified, I don't think that we necessarily need to spell out, at least not at this juncture, what a qualified paraprofessional would be. And so, absent any objections, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to proffer that we strike the word qualified on page 4, line 8, subitem 3. So it would read an ASD service paraprofessional, supervised and employed by a qualified ASD service provider.
Senator Estevez, you wish to be heard on this? Turn on your mic, please.
Can you say that again?
On line 8, he's just striking the word qualified. So the sentence will read, a qualified ASD service paraprofessional supervised and employed by a qualified ASD service provider. Just a one-word strike. Does any other senator wish to be heard on this? Are there any objections to the recommended amendment? There being no objection and no one else wanting to speak, so ordered. You may continue, Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 6, line 1, that is a continuation from page 5, and it talks about qualified autism spectrum disorder service providers. And it limits it to these individuals, starting on page 5, going into page 6, these individuals that provide treatment. Now, some of these individuals may not necessarily provide treatment, they may provide services. For example, an audiologist may perform a hearing test, and that isn't necessarily a treatment, it's an assessment, it's a service. So after the word treatment on page 6, line 1, I wanted to add the words or services, or we could even put or related services, but I would just put or services for simplicity.
On the amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Any objection to the amendment? Oh, Senator Estevez.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I think as a matter of legality, especially when we're talking about insurance, I think the verbiage is very important to keep it as treatment, as per the purview of the insurance company and what they provide. Although audiology is not directly treated, it's part of a treatment plan, I think as specified in the bill. So the hearing test and anything prescribed or recommended by the doctor falls under the scope of a treatment plan. I think the substitution for the verbiage services could be problematic with regards to the coverage that the insurance company is supposed to provide as a health insurance company. So I think that we need to be very careful with the verbiage there. As of right, I would object to that specific verbiage being changed, and I think it would still meet the intent if we keep it as treatment.
Thank you very much, Senator Estevez. Any other senator? Senator Nicholas, do you
Thank
wish
you,
to
Mr.
respond?
Speaker. I would like to. Being a parent of an individual, my son has autism, and so when we go into his meetings, we talk about his related services, not necessarily his related treatment. These services that are provided aren't necessarily treatments. For example, the occupational therapist will come into his classroom and will help him develop strategies for coping, staying concentrated on his work, not being distracted by his sensory needs. And those are not treatments, those are services, because they're helping him in his learning environment to be able to understand what he needs to do in order to be able to function. So if the individual, I'm not quite sure if there's an objection, but Just based on experience, Mr. Speaker, not everything is a treatment when it comes to providing services for these individuals who need that kind of care. So unless we'd like to yield to legal counsel, the reason why I'm making the amendment is because I'm just familiar with the fact that not everything is defined as a treatment in the realm of the services that are provided.
I think the concern that was raised was whether or not the difference between services and treatment is a distinction that might cause the insurance company not to provide coverage, or is it a distinction without a difference that they are providing it as part of the treatment plan? Any senator wish to? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hear both of the two arguments, and they're really both correct. But I think you said it right, is that to be able to distinguish this is that whatever treatment, if the treatment calls for either a medical treatment or a therapy or a service, if it is a treatment prescribed by the provider, then that's something that must be covered by the insurance. So unless legal has a different perspective, I really don't see, both the arguments are really correct here.
Let's take just a quick recess and have legal counsel assist us in this one.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to withdraw my
Let me turn
objection
the light.
to the amendment.
Legislature's back in session. Senator Estevez.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to withdraw my objection to the St. Nicholas amendment with regards to adding or services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Objection having been withdrawn, any other senator wish to be heard on the amendment? There being no objection, Senator Snickles, you can.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The retiring speaker in our recess has also pointed out on page 3, line 20, we again have a sentence here that says the treatment is prescribed by a physician and surgeon, and amend that to say physician or surgeon, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, I thought we.
I'm sorry, page 5, line 21. My apologies. Page 5, line 21.
And any senator wish to be heard on the striking of and the inserting of or on line 21 on page 5? There being none.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to implore the wisdom of the body, particularly on this one section here that I'm having a difficult time reconciling. So the entire, on page 7, starting on line 1, this entire section from page 7, line 1 to page 8, line 7, it kind of spells out the limitations and the parameters of what can and cannot be covered or denied. And when I read particularly subsection 1 on lines 8 to 11, it says, transitioning in from the previous section, it basically says that no health insurance plan can exclude or deny coverage for a treatment or impose dollar limits, deductibles, and co-insurance provisions based solely on the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. For the purpose of this paragraph, treatment includes diagnosis, assessment, and services. Now, if we go to subsection C, and I read subsection C, it kind of, I feel like it doesn't, I feel like it almost says the opposite of what of section 1. Subsection C says, the coverage required by this contract is subject to all the terms and conditions of the subscription contract. And then it reads, nothing in this chapter prevents a corporation from imposing deductibles, co-insurance, or other cost sharing in relation to the coverage required by this chapter. So that sentence, when I read that, it says that nothing can prevent them from imposing deductibles and co-insurance with respect to autism spectrum disorder. But then when you read lines 8 to 10, they shall not exclude or deny coverage for a treatment or impose dollar limits, deductibles, and co-insurance provisions based solely on the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So I'm trying to, and perhaps legal counsel can help me to understand, or I can yield to the author, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, why don't we take, Senator Dugas, do you wish to address it?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try the best that I could, and then maybe we can get legal counsel some guidance afterwards. But, Mr. Speaker, it looks on the surface that it does contradict each other. However, if you look at line 8 on page 7, it's exclude or deny coverage for treatment or impose dollar limits, deductibles, and co-insurance provisions based solely on the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So what we're saying here in this section is that because of that specific diagnosis, you're not able to exclude or deny any coverage or impose any dollar limits based solely just on that, on having being diagnosed with ASD. So it's like a pre-existing, just because you have a pre-existing condition, you cannot deny coverage for that individual based solely because of that. So that's the explanation for that. And so as we go on line or page 7, where it says the coverage, line 21, the coverage required by this chapter is subject to all terms and conditions of the subscription contract. Nothing in this chapter prevents a corporation from imposing deductibles, co-insurance, or other cost sharing in relation to the coverage required by this chapter. And this means, Mr. Speaker, which is simply what we have, like in our GovGuam plan. We have a deductible, whether it's a $1,500 or the $2,000, and we have co-pays that we're required to that we're required to be responsible for. And so we're saying, you can still do that in a regular plan. That's what this section is saying. And so it looks like it kind of contradicts, but it doesn't, because we're saying here is that you have a pre-existing condition, which is ASD, then you can't, based on that, deny coverage for that individual or that family. So that's the best explanation I could provide, and perhaps if legal counsel can look at that even further.
Okay. Why don't we just take a real short recess, and the three of you can discuss this with legal counsel. Legislature's back in session. Thank you very much for working this out. Senators, go ahead. Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In consultation with legal counsel, we're going to go ahead and allow the language to retain. So I will not be making any amendment at this time with respect to that.
Okay.
Just some other items. On page 10, just to earmark it for legal counsel's sake, page 10, lines 3 to 6, there should be a reference to fraternal benefit societies, an exclusion of some sort, perhaps, in that language, if that's going to be consistent throughout the measure. So an amendment for, I'm not quite sure if that would be inclusive of the technical amendment I requested earlier on lines 3 to 6, including excluding fraternal benefit societies.
Does council understand that?
Page 10, lines 3 to 6. Just to make sure that also got earmarked to exclude fraternal benefit societies. Okay. And then just some general comments, Mr. Speaker. First of all, much appreciation to the author for doing the work necessary to be able to get this measure onto the floor. There is a particular reference in here that just has me, wondering, and that is that, for example, on page 8, lines 4 to 7, the coverage changes depending on the age of the child, and the coverage changes from one amount to another after the child reaches the age of 9. And Caleb turned 9 this year. And I can tell you right now, Mr. Speaker, that the needs of an individual who has autism doesn't get reduced by 50% when they turn 9 years old. And I can tell you that their needs constantly change. So I just wanted to register on the record that while I understand that this overall legislation was modeled after various jurisdictions, I'm not entirely sold on the idea that coverage should be necessarily age-based. I think that as of anything that is insurance-related, coverage should be need-based. But I just wanted to register that for the record. And again, extend my thanks to the author for the measure. I also wanted to officially register, Mr. Speaker, in light of the current environment. Under normal circumstances, I would be comfortable voting on this measure, but I would like to request from legal counsel or from the body whether or not it would be necessary for me to recuse myself from participating in voting on this measure for conflict concerns.
Thank you very much for raising that. At this point, what we will do is legal counsel will look at it, and we will address it when we get into the voting file, because at that point you will be making your request, and will depend on legal counsel's guidance to assist us in making that decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I understand that Senator Lee wishes to be heard on this bill, and after Senator Lee, any other senator?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. As was made mention by several of my colleagues, autism affects so many in our community, and it's really critical that we pursue as many solutions as we can to help those impacted by ASD, autism spectrum disorder. I believe the bill proposed by Senator Rodriguez will help push our community forward in addressing this issue and in providing the services and the care that the Lizama family, the Duenas family, the St. Nicholas family, and so many families really need. We heard testimony from community leaders and family members about the need to provide better coverage in health insurance on Guam. I look forward to the Autism Center services that are being developed, and particularly in this bill, the establishment, I know we're going to consider it in a separate piece of legislation, but I look forward to more discussion on the Autism Spectrum Disorder Task Force to provide recommendations on future needs of our children and our community members. One such community member was Camille Paulino, and she said in her testimony from Hunter Speaks that these children are sure to be one day our future teachers, engineers, artists, with a keen eye for detail and an honesty and dedication to tasks that are exemplary. ASD is such a diverse disorder that presents itself in such a spectrum of ways. Truly, no two children with ASD are the same, end quote. And I ask that my colleagues vote yes on Bill 16-34 to mandate health insurance coverage for therapies, including applied behavioral analysis therapy, that will support our children with ASD so that they can continue to thrive and our island along with them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Any other senator wish to be heard? If any other senator wish to be heard? If not, oh wait, Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support this bill. I mean, we know the challenges of not only those who suffer from autism, but also the challenges of their families and the parents especially, and all the extra things that the family has to go through to, in love and care for their child. But I do have a question or two, and it's not really posed in a way to try to figure out how to correct some of the things, but I do have some issues. One is during the public hearing, Dr. Duenas stated that there are no known autism spectrum disorder providers on this island or currently practicing on this island. And so it seems to me that this is one of those chicken and the egg type situations, that we're going to provide a benefit, we're going to require insurance coverage for treatment that require providers from providers, but there are no providers on this island at this point. And so I guess the question and the thought in my mind is, right now the effective date would, I think, is stated, around October, mandates October 1st for the effective date of the coverage, because I guess that would be the effective date of, say, for example, the Guam health insurance when it becomes effective. And so I'm just wondering if maybe the author would answer maybe whether or not we should perhaps include some kind of language that changes the effective date to perhaps when the first certified provider is certified. In other words, otherwise we'll be paying for coverage that really has no providers. And maybe I'm off base, and I'm willing to be corrected, but I'm just, again, drawing from the conversation at the public hearing on this. Dr. Duenas did state that there were no certified providers on this island.
On that first question, Senator Rodriguez, or any other senator wish to address it?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for our colleagues' concern. But really, if this passes and we have coverage that's granted to families, doesn't stop them now from being able to seek services off island. Because he's right, there's no current certified providers here, but the work, as I mentioned in my opening, we're laying the groundwork to ensure that we have these services here. Next to this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, is what we're working on now to ensure that we get these certified providers to come to island and be able to train our people. And so the work is ongoing. But as we work to build our capacity here, this should not stop us from being able to provide these services for families that now can take their children, their families off island to seek some of these cares and these treatments.
Thank you very much. Does that address your concern, Senator Espaldon?
It does, and like I said, I'm not trying to poke holes in anything because I think this is an important issue to the families and to those who suffer from autism. But I do know that even that, in terms of the treatment and services that somebody who's affected with autism, right, even those treatments aren't just let's go off island and get it treated and come back home. It's kind of a continuing type of a basis. And again, I raise no objection to what's in the bill, but it's an issue that, again, we'd be paying for something that maybe we don't really have any service providers to cover, or it would give almost a false sense that, okay, now that we're covered, we can go to the states, just to find out that really this is not one of those situations where you perform an operation and the issue is taken care of. But I raise no objections really on this bill. However, I do have another question, and that really relates to the cost. The bill lists as, I guess as was determined, it's basically a 1% increase in premiums as a likely cost for providing the Envision coverage. And using that number for the, using the numbers for the current GovGuam health insurance contract of $95 million, that would equate to about $1 million in additional premiums for GovGuam only. And I guess the question was this number used to determine the coverage caps of the $50,000 for the 3 to 9-year-olds and $25,000, the coverage for 9 to 21-year-olds? And again, I'm just kind of building upon the sentiment of the previous speaker who was saying that his child is now at that 9-year-old stage, and yet, the needs are continuing. And so I'm just trying to get a better grasp that with $1 million, is that how we determined it? Basically taking that 1%, putting it against the $95 million that the GovGuam contract now, that we now spend for the GovGuam health insurance contract, and then breaking down the premiums that way, or the benefits that way?
Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if our good colleague can restate the question and state I heard $1 million impact, if he can just clarify that.
Yeah, and I think it was in the on page 2 on line 12. Basically, it states an overall increase in the cost of 1% is estimated by the Council of Affordable Health Insurance. Of course, it does say that the cost for Guam may vary depending upon the number of children with the disorder and the severity of the disability. And the question really is actually, was that the number, if we're taking 1% in this case of the GovGuam health insurance contract, which is around $95 million a year, and then that means that'll equate to roughly about $1 million. Is that how we came up with the coverage of $50,000 for those under 9, and then $25,000 for those over
Yes.
9?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so no, that's not where we came up with the maximum cost benefits. But if you do look at the fiscal note that was provided, Mr. Speaker, by BBMR, the total financial impact is estimated, at least for the first year, would be about $59,000, and then for the second year would be about $121,000, and no impact was foreseen for fiscal year 2017. And so, the fiscal note, I believe, did a good job in indicating what the potential fiscal impacts would be. And so I would ask my colleagues to perhaps review that if they haven't yet, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Espaldon.
And I'm definitely very satisfied with that answer. And again, more than anything, one last item, though, and maybe if the author could point it out, this bill is as amended by the committee, and yet I was trying to look for where the amendments were. If maybe he could just kind of point out where the amendments were, or the amendment was different from what the bill was as introduced, then perhaps we can, take a closer look at that. I was just wondering if there is a major issue or a major amendment that was made.
Thank you very much. Senator Rodriguez, do you wish to point where some of the major...
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After the public hearing, we did have a markup meeting, and some of the stakeholders, including members, representatives from the insurance industry, were present. And so I can detail each where these amendments were made. We can start off on page 8. There was amendments made to the Autism Spectrum Disorder Task Force. However, that is now moot because we had a previous amendment that struck out the entire section on the task force. Another amendment that was made, Mr. Speaker, was on page 9. Sections 29A, 105A5 was amended to include assessing the available network.
I'm sorry, what line was that?
Page 9,
Uh-huh.
sections 29A, 105A5. And it was amended to include assessing the available network.
Okay.
And again on page 9, Mr. Speaker, sections 29A, 105C was amended. Well, that deals with the task force too, so that's moot now because that was stricken.
Right.
And also on page 8, section 29A 104B3, item 3 was deleted in its entirety.
Okay.
So those were the only changes that were made after the hearing based on the markup meeting.
Thank you very much. And the question that was raised by the good Senator Espaldon raises something that we probably can and should discuss about when we bring to the floor a bill with the substitutions or the amendments, maybe with guidance from legal counsel and the Committee on Rules, we might be able to have the either single underline or the double underline, whatever those things are, to make sure that all the members understand what the changes from the original bill were, so that as we discuss it, we know what those changes were. Okay, but that's for a discussion off the floor with legal counsel about how best to deal with this and Committee on Rules. I think we have something in the rules about that, but we'll just have to check to make sure that we enforce it. Okay?
Just to clarify, Mr. Speaker, if I may, part of our practice now with the way bills are handled through COR is when a bill is introduced, it becomes available on the website. When it becomes corrected by the prime sponsor, that new corrected version also becomes available on the website. When it becomes amended by the committee, that also becomes available on the website. And so what we bring to the floor is what ultimately was filed in the committee report. But if any member wishes, and I actually did this with respect to this particular bill, if any member wishes to pull up the evolution of the measure prior to it actually being brought for official consideration, they can look at every single iteration online and then just layer them over and page by page compare them.
I understand, but I think the question that was raised poses a good question about why we don't have the corrections with the color boxes on the side, that this thing was taken out by the committee. It wouldn't detract, but it would assist people in understanding the evolution without pulling up because some of us don't have 4 screens to be able to look at it at the same time. It would seem to me that if we could decide amongst ourselves that as it comes to the floor, though it's denoted as substituted by the committee, all the substitutions should be in there so that we're not blindsided. We know what was taken out, so we know what we're dealing with. But that's just a comment that I'm making at this point, but we'll discuss it more offline.
Sure. And just for, I guess, to close out the conversation, Mr. Speaker, we have had some measures that were introduced that required dramatic corrections by the sponsors. If we were to include all the notations from inception to floor version, I'm not quite sure we would have enough space on the paper sometimes. So just a functional issue, but we can discuss it as a body at a later time.
Thank you. Any other senator do you have anything further on the main issue?
No, but on that point, again, I trust that we can work this out with rules, because for some of us who are not as familiar with certain subjects, and when we see the introduced versions and we make we do our analysis based on that, and not really knowing really when it comes, and we might agree or disagree, and then it comes to the floor and it says amendment and we don't know where it is, then again, we wouldn't be able to argue in favor that maybe the original version may have been the better version. But that'll be another subject. But I do want to thank the sponsor of this bill for all the work he's done. I know that the families and the children of who suffer or are challenged with autism really could use as much help as that they can get, and I fully support this measure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Esteves, do you wish to be heard? Any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Munya, you look like you wanted to say something, and I'd be willing to recognize you because otherwise we're going to close. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill, and I thank the author for putting it forth. I had an opportunity to host a few autism events and realize that everyone here on Guam is connected to the disorder, whether it be a family member or a friend, a child of a friend. And so at first, my initial concern was the fiscal impact it would have, this being a standard practice for insurance companies. But taking a look at the fiscal notes, I see that the impact is very minimal at 15 cents per member per month for FY 2017, and then the following year, FY 2018, at 31 cents per member per month. So I realize that it's such a small contribution across the board for the government for us to help the community and parents who are already struggling physically with this disorder, their children's disorder, and helping them financially. So I rise in support of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Rodriguez, you're invited to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank our colleagues for their participation in this measure. Before I do close, Mr. Speaker, I do have one amendment that I'd like to make, which was something that we kind of have an oversight on, and it's page 3, line 9. What this section does is the definitions. And we're saying here that autism spectrum disorder means one of the following disorders as defined in the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association. And A is autistic disorder, B, Asperger's syndrome, and C, this is where I like to make the amendment to strike out the existing language and to replace it with pervasive developmental disorder, comma, not otherwise specified.
Does everybody understand that amendment?
And this is?
It's replacing C, autism spectrum disorder, with pervasive
developmental disorder,
disorders,
comma, not otherwise specified. And this is the language that is from the Manual of Mental Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association.
The DSM-R 4 or 5 by now.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody wish to be heard on the amendment proposed? Senator Torres?
Just a point of clarification, if the mover of the amendment will so yield. I just want to ensure now that the new terminology that you're proposing, that is specific to autism, or does that then broaden the range of coverage to other types of mental disorders?
Do you yield?
Thank you very much. It is specific to autism. That's what the purpose is.
Okay. Satisfied? Okay, thank you very much. Senator, Madam Vice Speaker, do you have?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the senator could just clarify, who defines this term?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as it's stated here, it's defined in the most recent edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association. And we've taken this, we've looked at the state of Arizona, state of California's model in developing this piece of legislation, and this is the language that we were able to obtain from those models.
The title of the manual, or I don't know why it's not capitalized, but unless I'm mistaken, it would have come from the DSMR, whatever the most recent edition. When I was in family court, it was 3, but I'm not sure by now it's 10.
Okay, I see. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And thank you again to our colleagues for their participation.
Oh, wait,
Point of order,
we
Mr.
didn't,
Speaker, on the amendment.
Oh, sorry.
On the amendment,
Sorry.
on C, any objection? If not, you may close.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in the opening, that this really now sets our groundwork to ensure that the services and the treatments for ASD is something we can really make a reality here on Guam. And I really give a special recognition, Mr. Speaker, to Dr. Vinny Duenas. He's a physician in our community. He has him and his wife have a son, Hunter. And it was early last year that he came to visit me and spoke to me about autism. Because to be honest with you, Mr. Speaker, I've always heard about it, didn't know much about the challenges that our families face. But when he brought his concerns forward to me and discussed this nonprofit that he created, Hunter Speaks organization, it really broadened my mind and made me understand and appreciate what the families feel, the challenges they face. I can never feel it personally myself, but I can only imagine the challenges they face. And I spoke to families that go through those hardships, and I spoke to families on Guam too, local families that are fortunate and blessed to be able to afford to take their children off island. And I've seen, Mr. Speaker, the night and day of a family who has taken his son off island to be treated, and families here on Guam that don't have the means to do it. And I know that early intervention, being able to treat our children early on is really going to matter, and it's what's going to help in providing some relief and healing for a lot of these families. And this family that I've talked about, not Dr. Duenas' family, but another local family here, their son is a bright young man now. He was diagnosed when he was I believe 2 years old. Now he's much older, and you saw the difference. But the family, it took a lot for the family to relocate. They had a successful business here, being able to juggle life in the States and here on Guam, just to be able to provide that service. And so what we're doing here, Mr. Speaker, is small steps to ensure that we have these services available here. While we're waiting to establish the capacity here, this is providing that avenue for our families to be able to start to get the treatment and services they need and deserve off island. So in recognition of Hunter Duenas, this bill, once it's enacted, if it's enacted into law, will be called the Hunter's Law of 2017, and really in recognition of Dr. Duenas and his son, his wife, Tanya, bring this issue to the forefront and being my driving force in making this happen. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
On the motion to send it to the voting file, there being no objection, Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized on Bill 17-34.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to place Bill 17-34 as introduced on the third reading. Be allowed to briefly speak on it.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the people of Guam have a long relationship with dogs, so much that we often take it for granted. Dogs are commonplace in our everyday life. We even have a memorial to the war dogs that served in World War II and helped liberate our island. How many times have you had to stop because a boony dog decided to take a nap in the middle of the road? And yes, we do have an abundance of these dogs on island. We have struggled with controlling this population, and yes, these dogs brings a lot of challenges to our community. Maybe it's time that we look at this problem in a different way, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of Bill 17-34 is to take a look at our dogs in a different way. Sometimes the answer to some of our problem is laying at our feet, or yes, laying in the middle of the road. This bill intends to take advantage of the volumes of research on how dogs can improve the human condition. A quick search on Google, Mr. Speaker, will produce thousands of results on how dogs are used to help us, from helping young children to read to assisting in rehabilitating prison inmates. The list is extensive and only limited by our imagination. On a personal note, my family and I recently adopted a dog from Gain. We have a 4-year-old and a 10-year-old, of course, our 21-year-old. And our 4-year-old, he has a bunch of medical conditions that he has, and a lot of times when he acts up, we kind of give him. We tell our 10-year-old, we give him a lot of leeway. Say, you know what he's going through, and so you gotta just give in to your brother, And so, but we found that having a dog at home, because we haven't had an animal or dog. Only when our girl, who's 21 now, was much younger. But since then, we haven't had an animal. But having this dog, which we adopted, he was called T-Bone from Gain. He was a Jack Russell Terrier. We didn't know. We thought we were adopting a booty dog. But when we got the adoption papers, I said, wow, we got a Jack Russell Terrier for $100. That was the adoption fee. And so just having that dog around and seeing what it has done for our 4-year-old and how it helps him cope with, some of the things that he goes through, I know it works. And so can you imagine what it could do for other children, for other families that experience worse than what my child is experiencing? Bill 17, Mr. Speaker, may seem like one of those feel-good bills. And yes, I hope we all feel good about this. But what this bill does is start our community to look at how they can make dogs a meaningful asset to our island. This bill establishes a common language so we can agree on the various ways dogs can be used. It encourages government agencies to take a look at how they can incorporate dogs into their operations, whether it be in the courts, allowing children to testify in traumatic cases, or to bring smiles and comfort to children in the hospital. This bill takes steps to make those things happen. Guam is blessed by having an active not-for-profit community. Talks are beginning about collaborating with these strong nonprofit groups and our Department of Corrections with the goal of putting in a prison dog program. Once again, I challenge all of us to take a quick Google search and see how these prison dog programs have made strides in not only making dogs more adoptable, but also helping our prison inmates move back into our community. In closing, Mr. Speaker, all of God's creatures on earth, the dog is the closest to humankind. If you know the story of San Roque, it was a dog that brought him food to stay alive. It is time we take pause and consider for a moment how this relationship can grow and flourish to help us in so many more and different ways. And as I zone in and speak a lot about dogs being used in animal-assisted interventions, we know that there are other animals, horses. We had last term, we had a roundtable, and we had Dr. Sam Mabini, who I believe is a trainer also for animals. I forget what type of animal, but it wasn't dogs. But we know that There's a lot of animals that could be used in terms of AAI. And so we're hoping that with this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, that we start the process in seeing the value of using animal-assisted interventions in a lot of the challenges we face in our community. And before closing, Mr. Speaker, if for those of you who were at the public hearing, we had an individual who testified, Shannon Celine. She's a special ed teacher over at DOE, and she had a very difficult time when she first came to Guam several years ago in getting her service dog allowed into her school, into her classroom. She fought it. She won the case and was able to have her dog be with her. But she talked about the importance of having these service dogs available for her. She talked about how the children in her classroom benefited as well. She had kids that didn't read to her, didn't speak to her, but when left with a dog, saw these kids reading to the dog, talking to the dog. And so in memory of that dog that since passed away, it was a German Shepherd, name was Siva, I'd like to make an amendment, Mr. Speaker, and on page 1, line 2, section 1, the short title, that this act be cited as SIVA's Animal Assisted Intervention Act of 2017.
On that amendment proposed by Senator Rodriguez, any senator wish to be heard or any senator wish to object? Senator Munya.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clarify the spelling of SIVA. SIVA.
Thank you. It's SEAVA, SIVA.
Okay. Any other questions, comments, or objections? Hearing none.
Thank you.
Any senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On the main motion. Any senator wish to be heard? Seeing no hands, Senator Vice Speaker Terlahi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I attended the public hearing on this bill, and I just wanted to find out from the sponsor, there were several suggestions made by the former owner of SIVA, but I don't see that those suggestions were incorporated into this bill, and I'm just curious if why not, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, there were some suggestions and some there was testimony, but after reviewing those testimony and speaking with the constituents, we were fine in leaving the bill as is, and that it really didn't make any impact on the bill either way, and so that's why we've decided to just move forward and report it out as is.
Thank you very much. Is that satisfied, Vice Speaker? Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is an excellent bill. I have several animals myself. At one point, I had 5 dogs, and yeah, it's calmed me down majorly. But really, I have one question that I'd like to ask if he would yield, and that is on page 18 under on line 20, item number 18. Basically lists DOC, DYA, and GPD lockup and any other private club as not within the definition of a public accommodation. In the case of the government agencies, now if a person with a service dog is arrested and detained, what happens to the service dog, and does the government have to make any other accommodations for the detained individual? And it's just one of those things, because we are focusing on the ability of these animals to be able to really help its owner, but if they then become, if they then are arrested or are held in lockup, do we need to make any special accommodations for these people or these animals?
Yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that question, and that's a valid question. And that's why what this bill does, Mr. Speaker, is gets our departments and agencies to start to put rules in place and guidelines in place. And so issues like this, I would expect that Department of Corrections, in developing their guidelines on this, and as I spoke about in my opening, we have nonprofits, GAIN specifically, that's working with them now in developing a program that issues like this would be addressed in those in promulgating those guidelines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, no, that was a good answer, and yes, it has to start somewhere, I suppose, and this is a good start. But I do support this measure. And I again thank the author for its introduction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On the main motion? If not, Senator Rodriguez, you're welcome to close. On the motion to send the bill down, there being no objection, so ordered. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized on Bill 23.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to place Bill number 23 on the third reading file and be afforded an opportunity to speak on the measure.
Hearing no objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill number 23 is actually, and by the way, I just wanted to comment how interesting it is that our session has a lot of alignment in the measures that we have on today's docket, or in the docket for this legislative session. Bill 23 is related to some previous legislation in terms of its need for us to be able to get the necessary planning done within this government so that we have a clear understanding of what it is that we're supposed to do in case things go wrong. Bill 23 is an act to add a new section 3132 to Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 5, Guam Code annotated relative to the establishment of operational continuity plans for each agency of the government of Guam. I first encountered the idea, Mr. Speaker, of having these operational continuity plans when I was working at a local financial institution. And part of the requirements of the FDIC is that every single individual financial institution has to have a business continuity plan. Now, the FDIC in general, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, provides auditing and insurance services and general backup for the overall financial institutions that are under the FDIC. However, even the FDIC sees value in each individual financial institution having its own business continuity plan in the event that something were to disrupt their services. Part of these business continuity plans in the private sector, Mr. Speaker, are intended to make sure that in case something happens, the customers who are affected are still going to be able to access the services that they need. In the case of banking, it's being able to access your money, being able to move it around, being able to pay your bills. In this instance, with these operational continuity plans in our government, what we are seeking to do is to ensure that each individual agency has the necessary plans in place on an individual basis to be able to address the needs of the community in the event that unforeseen circumstances were to cause disruption. And these disruptions are actually enumerated in this legislation, Mr. Speaker, and there are things that we are sometimes familiar with. Starting on page 3, the entire section here that we're adding addresses some of these problems. Starting on line 17, events which would disrupt the ability of the agency to operate, such as loss of personnel by retirement, whether known or unknown in advance, National Guard deployment, military reserve deployment, sickness, death, or other contingencies. That's just one item. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that we have a lot of institutional knowledge in this government. All of us, with respect to our oversight, are oftentimes referred to a particular individual when we have a specific question respective to the agencies that we oversee. Such is the case not only of our branch of government, but with the community at large. If there is a particular issue that needs to be addressed, oftentimes we rely very heavily on institutional knowledge And the issue becomes, what were to happen if we were to lose some of that knowledge? So this single item here is intended to ensure that if we were to lose any personnel, whether by retirement or deployment or unfortunate circumstances, would we still have access to the kind of services that we would have had access to if that institutional knowledge was in place? Another item, number 2, is the loss, malfunction, or breakdown of equipment necessary for the efficient provision of services. A classic example, Mr. Speaker, are the very cameras that we have in this room and the broadcasts that we present to our community. If we were to lose these resources, how do we go about making sure that our people are still able to access our channel and watch our business? Another item here is the loss of physical or electronic records necessary for the efficient provision of services. This was actually a real-time problem, Mr. Speaker, that happened several years ago, where data in the Office of Vital Statistics was lost, and it was difficult for individuals to be able to access critical information like birth certificates and the like because of the lost information. We have vital information throughout this government, Mr. Speaker, whether it's medical records, whether it's vital statistics, whether it's tax records. The loss of any of these critical records could be crippling not only to an individual and their particular circumstances, but to this government at large. Another item here, Mr. Speaker, is the unavailability of a facility which is necessary for the efficient provision of services. If there were to be a massive storm and it were to wipe out Department of Revenue and Taxation, our hospital, what have you, how would we go about being able to continue to provide the services to our people absent the facilities necessary to do so? Another item, Mr. Speaker, and this is something that that we've encountered throughout our history, is the unanticipated reduced funding levels during a fiscal year. It's possible, Mr. Speaker, at any given time, because things happened, that we're not going to be receiving the revenue that we thought we would. Some of our agencies currently are continuing to operate absent some of that revenue. And while they're all coping with it in their own way and their management is trying to make the best of their circumstances, the reality is that the planning necessary to be able to do so with the least possible impact on the people that we serve is not necessarily in place. Oftentimes we sit back, sometimes we dip into reserves, but I think having this issue addressed would greatly ensure that the community is properly protected against any possible losses of revenue. We also require that any combination of the above be reasonably anticipated. And if there are any other items that are so identified by the governing board or in the absence of a governing board by Magallac and Guahan, that they can also, at their discretion, include addressing those concerns. Overall, Mr. Speaker, all we're trying to do is make sure that every single agency has an operational continuity plan in place in case something were to happen that were to disrupt their ability to provision services. It's a healthy thing to have. It would be really good to have for our community. In the event something were to happen, we can take comfort in knowing that we have a very specific plan in place to be able to ensure that operations continue. And for the record, Mr. Speaker, in light of introducing this bill, I've also directed our executive director and our central offices to develop their own operational continuity plan, which is in its semi-draft form and available to members upon request. At the very least, Les Latour will do it, but I believe that it's also a very good practice to be done throughout our government. It'll be something healthy. And one of the things that we've noticed in the development of our operational continuity plan is when you actually take the time to sit back and ask yourself, how would we continue doing this if circumstances were to change from the status quo? It gives you an even greater awareness of what it is that you do on a regular basis and allows you to evaluate how to make it as efficient as possible. Because if you ever had to turn something off on one side and turn it off in another under a different set of circumstances, you're going to want to make it as efficient as possible. And so it actually gives you a second look, an outsider perspective almost, on how you do business. And that's something that would be very good for our government to do as well. So I ask my colleagues to kindly consider Bill 23-34. I think that having these plans in place would be a very good thing for our people and a very healthy thing for our government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Nicholas. Any senator wish to be heard on the main motion? Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. Again, I think it addresses some long-standing issues that we've had in government. with respect to the executive branch directors and administrators to have autonomy to exercise or go off base or outside of the plan in order to get the job done. I still think it's always essential that we do have standards in place. So again, I support this bill as it is read, and thank you. Thank you to the sponsor as well.
Thank you very much, Senator Estevez. Any other senator wish to be heard on the main motion? On the main motion, any senator wish to be heard? If not, Senator Nicholas, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to, as a courtesy, add Senator Estevez as a co-sponsor.
There being no objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the motion to send the bill down to the voting file, there being no objection. Next on the agenda is Resolution 25-34. Madam Vice Speaker. Oh, wait. Did I miss something? No. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Senator Ada, are you ready on Bill 58? Okay. Or would you rather do that after lunch? Well, I'm just wondering, how long would it take, and do you think we should do it after? All right, let's break for lunch, 2 o'clock. Be ready. As soon as he's done, Senator Munya, if you're ready with one, we can finally finish that, and I'll try to see if I'm ready to address the set-aside in my Bill 15. So we'll start with Senator Ada, close with the two of us, and then we'll start the resolutions tomorrow. Or today, if we can move fast enough. Thank you very much. We're in recess until 2 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you very much, Senators.